think, well, maybe he gave me a break because I left him 5 trout. I don't know. But I actually gifted there for about a year here. Starting in 2013, I spent I'd say about 11 months gifting, taking food in for them. And,
sure.
Yeah.
How's that going? I mean, is that being effective, or how's that working?
Yeah, it was really effective actually. When I started doing it, I didn't have no results for the first month. They wouldn't touch anything I took out there, and it's like, well, this is going nowhere. Like every time I went out. Well, when I went back in January of 2012, that was actually my 4th sighting. I saw one that was like 9.5 feet tall that day. Me and my brother Mike. And I only saw it for about 3 seconds, 4 seconds. It was standing along a right-of-way to the left, just off the right-of-way. And me and my brother Mike had already found like 90 tracks in the snow, 80 to 90 tracks, walking all around. They walked out of the water. This was only like 70 yards into the woods from the roadway. We started seeing the tracks. And I have pictures of them on my Facebook, actually, a couple of these tracks. They walked out of the woods, or out of the water, and walked all around. And there was fresh deer tracks there also. And I don't know if they got a deer, but they were following the deer or following the tracks, looking around. And they weaved around, went a couple places around, moved towards the creek, away from the creek. And they came back around and walked back into the creek and disappeared. Probably 30, 40 yards below where they exited the water. They went right back into the water. And it's really interesting. After looking at all these tracks for like about 20 minutes, my brother Mike was kneeling down looking at one, and I looked up. I had a chill, feeling something. We weren't looking in the right place. I just had that feeling. I started looking through the woods, and I looked down this right-of-way, and I could see this black shape along these pines. And it's like it was just standing there. It was on 2 feet, and you could see its head leaning right towards me, looking down the right-of-way. He was just off the side of it. And as soon as he realized I was looking at him, it went straight down on all 4s and went across this right-of-way. When he hit in the middle of this right-of-way, he covered the whole right-of-way. It was probably an 8-foot road, like an old oil lease road or logging road. Probably 50 years old is what it was. Nothing was growing on it, and it was clean. There was, all snow down through there. And like I said, it went right across, down over this bank, and then into the water. And it's like I ran right over. First thing I said is, Mike, did you see that? He goes, no, what? And, I seen something. It's like he just seen a black, movie, something black. He said, bear? I said, no, it wasn't a bear, Mike. I took off. I ran over the creek. It was probably, from the time it disappeared over the creek till I got to the creek was probably 15 seconds, 20 seconds tops. And I could see all the way down around the creek, probably 150 yards before, this whole area where it winded now. This creek has changed so much since then. Floods and that have widened it out. It's really wide down through there, probably as much as 15 feet, in places, 20 feet. Well, I'd say 18 feet, maybe the widest point. But you could see all the way down around the bend and that, and there was nothing black. I mean, all I could see is snow, trees, evergreens, but there was nothing. I looked around went over the hillside, and the snow couldn't make out any tracks at all there. But you could see where the snow was all flattened out. Like when it went down the bank, it looked like it was dragging its legs behind, It was crawling. It was on all 4s, and I don't know if it went down on its knees or if it just, slid down the bank, but there was just probably a 3.5 to 4 foot wide swat, like a giant sled went down it, and just all the snow and everything went right into the water, it looked like, and it was gone. It's like I could not see it nowhere. It was gone. I could not believe it disappeared. For as big as this thing was, I mean, when it was down on all 4s, probably its back was probably 4 feet off the ground. It was just amazing how big this thing was. It was huge.
And you said it ran on all 4s?
Well, it didn't really run. It actually crawled slowly, almost like maybe, I had this feeling like it was trying to imitate a bear. That's what it reminded me of.
Right.
It just real casual. I've seen lots of bears out in the woods. When you see them, they're gone. They haul butt. They take off. They don't hang around here. They're not dangerous in Pennsylvania unless you'd have to step on one or maybe get too close to a cub. And really, that's rare that they would attack you. I mean, people say, oh, you can hear their cubs. Well, I've seen game commissioners crawl right into bears' dens here in PA, dart the mother with a pole, and then the bear runs right out past them, out of the hole, and leaves the cubs there. It just starts running, so it's like they're so scared in Pennsylvania. They know the consequences when hunters go out in the woods, what happens.
Right.
It's not like Alaska or a black bear will attack you just like a grizzly bear. In Pennsylvania, bears have fears of humans.
Sure.
I'm glad for that fact.
I guess.
But that was my fourth sighting that day.
Huh.
I had one in between the 91 incident and this one. It was up in Oil Creek State Park. It was actually 6 years ago. My kid's birthday party we had up there. We took probably 20 pounds of food, hot dogs, hamburgers. We had ribs, everything, for the party for all the guests. And we had a big cookout along the creek. It's called the Rin Farm area, picnic area.
Mm-hmm.
And right just past the pavilion, there's a little path that leads right down to the creek, Oil Creek itself, which Oil Creek's a beautiful creek. It's 25, 30 feet across, in places wider, a little shallower, narrower in places. And we walked down to the creek several times. We'd been cooking, we had food all over the place. And after everybody started heading home about 7:30, now we got everything packed up and got in the car, we started leaving. We pulled out of the picnic area, took a left, and we're working our way to Route 8, which is the way we came into the Oil Creek Park. There's several ways you can come in, like 5 or 6 actually.
Mm-hmm.
And we're driving up over the hillside, and we're going up over the hill. There's a roadway. After you get to the top of the hill, it breaks to the right, and it runs down through the woods, dirt road, and it'll come out down by an old cemetery. And after you come out of there, it leads right onto the same road. It turns into a small strip of paved road, and then you come right out right by Route 8 also. We're probably 3.5 miles from Route 8 at this point. We're heading up the hillside. We just go past that dirt road, and we're starting down this hill. Not a steep one at all, but it was a long stretch, probably 120 yards of roadway you could see before the next bend. And right away, something came over the guardrails and all fours, and it was so tight to them guardrails, it was just like almost looking like it laid on the guardrails as it crawled over. It was just so tight to them. And it was on all fours. It came up the road, and it was hauling butt. I never seen anything move so fast in my life. And you could tell it was panicking. It was every time it would move forward, it would either break to the left or to the right. It would, all the way up the road, it was like left, right, like it didn't know which way to go. And it came up the road so fast, and then at the last second, we're doing 35 miles an hour down this hill, and it cut left, and shot past our car. I don't know how we didn't hit it. It had to be inches from our front bumper.
Wow.
And it hit this bank right beside to my right. It goes up 15, 16, 17 feet. It's almost like a 90-degree angle, probably about an 85-degree angle. It shoots up that bank and is gone over that hillside, the top of the hill, and just disappeared. From the point where it came over the guardrails and came up the road and then up that hillside and that bank and disappeared, you're talking 95 yards, almost 100 yards. And it covered that territory, that area, in probably 3 seconds, maybe a little longer than 3 seconds.
Wow.
Never seen anything move that fast in my life. I mean, it was just amazing. Everybody was just speechless. My wife was driving. My kids were in the back seat. And only 2 of the boys saw it. And what they saw was just a blur. It happened so fast. I was leaning to the right. I had my face right to the glass, staring at this thing going up the hill. It just amazed me. its back legs were passing the front arms going up the hill. I
Wow.
never seen anything move like that, where the back legs could come ahead of the arms, you know? And it just held itself, and you could tell it was grabbing on, you know, and going up that hill. It wasn't, you know, walking, it was grabbing. And it just went up that hill so fast. It's like I never seen it. It reminded me of like a monkey, you know, the way it was moving.
Right.
This thing didn't look big. I'd say probably 5.5 feet tall, you know, 160 pounds, maybe 180 pounds. It looked like it had short hair, you know, but it was hard to see it move. I didn't see hair blowing or anything or moving. It just looked solid black from head to toe. So I'm thinking the hair was rather short, but I said it was very black, very dark black. The time it started over the guardrails until it disappeared was just, I know it wasn't 4 seconds.
Sure.
Maybe 3 to 3.5 seconds, and it was gone. My wife didn't even have a chance to hit the brakes, you know, when it got in front of us. She never stopped, you know, never slowed down. She's just like, what was that? And I said, I don't know, you know, that's all I did. You know? It's like I stared at it. I knew what it was, but I just could not believe it. We had seen it.
Right. And they just came out on you while you were driving by.
Yeah, it happened so fast. My wife just like stared at me with her eyes about the size of silver dollars. Like, is that a bear? I said, I don't think so. And she kind of looked at me like, okay, Sasquatch again. You know, you can see it. You know, because she's heard my stories. You know, she's about the only person I would tell any of them about. You know, at that point. You know, and it's like, yeah, I know you don't believe me, so I won't go there any further. You know. It's just,
So you have this report, or you had this sighting, and then you have your fourth sighting that you were just talking about a moment ago. But what comes after that? I mean, I know you said you had 5 sightings altogether. Is that correct?
My last sighting was in May of last year. I took my ex-girlfriend, you know, I'm now divorced, and I took my ex-girlfriend out, and she wanted to see one because I told her all my stories. You know, she believed me. You know, she had no doubt. She knew what I was telling her was true because it's the way I tell them. You know, to her. You know, it's just like I get excited like a little kid now about it. You know,
I'll give you that.
Yeah, I do. I love it when I'm out in the woods looking, when researching, because I feel like a little kid discovering something new. You know?
Sure.
But yeah, we went. We got dropped off. Actually, we planned to hike back to town. Her son and girlfriend took us out to the same spot where I, in '91, you know, jumped over these guardrails running for my life.
Right.
And we got dropped off. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon. We planned on hiking all the way to the river, and then just following the river back to Oil City. And we took 2 backpacks. We had loaded up. We each had a backpack. We had food, have a lunch and eat. You know, we had snacks. We had drinks and everything. And we were ready for the hike. You know, I had my walking stick. Took my machete and everything. It's like we figured we'll have a good time. You know, have fun.
Sure.
And we found about probably 10 tracks that day. You know, in the first hour. She's taking pictures of them with her cell phone. I didn't have nothing. I didn't have my cell phone with me that day. It's like, I'm not sure why. Right after my old one broke that I had at that time period. But she had her cell phone, so if we got into trouble, we could call. And she was taking pictures all along the way. We'd seen some minor structures, nothing too much at that point.
Sure.
And we found like 10 nice tracks. And we were probably about a mile down in the woods close to it. And saw this beautiful big log running down, sitting there just right in the middle of the hollow. Beautiful sit. It was probably 35-inch diameter log, you know. And we sat down and just started eating our lunch. And we were having a great time. She goes, oh, I wanted to see something so bad, you know. What is she saying? I said, I know, hon. I said, it don't work that way. It just don't work that way.
Right.
I can come out 10 times and be lucky to find tracks sometimes, you know.
Sure.
It's just the way it goes. You know, I had fun anyway, she says, you know. We're eating our sandwiches and having our drinks. Probably there 20 minutes and we heard a twig snap. we both leaned around. There's like 8 trees right where we were at growing. We had to lean around the trees to see what made the sound. As soon as we leaned over and looked, we both saw it at the same time. There was one juvenile. It was probably almost 6 feet tall, solid black, just walked out behind this bush. And one was right behind it. And just as we saw it, we're leaning around the tree, both of us, it saw us. And it froze. It's walking sideways to us, 45 feet away, and it just froze right there. And it's got one arm out forward, one arm back, and it's got its head tilted right at us because when it made eye contact, it just stopped dead. And the one behind the bush had its head sticking out, just that was it, just the head. At that point, I saw the third one coming down the hillside, and there was a tree right there, and it had a V probably about 5 feet off the ground. It just V'd up and went 2 different directions. Probably when the tree broke and V'd out, logs were probably about 12 to 14 inches diameter. The base of the tree looked like about probably 24 inches, diameter, nothing huge. And this thing coming down the hillside, you could tell it realized something was going on. It just got right behind the tree and stuck its head right in the V of the tree and just started watching. So we had the one out in the open, profile on us sideways, and the one behind the bush with its head sticking out. And I said, "Do you see that?" And she's like, "Well, yeah." And it's like, she's like, "Oh my God," what she wanted, it was right there. It's like the odds of that are just unbelievable. And I said, "We're so lucky. The first time we go out, it's like we're staring at it." And she goes, "What's it doing?" I said, "It's frozen solid. It looks scared." You could see it was scared. It was panicking. We're sitting there, and I said, "Just keep eating our lunch and just watch it." I'm not going to take my eyes off it.
Right.
Probably a minute of watching. I said, "Can you get a picture of it?" She goes, "I'll try." And she pulls her phone up, and she lines it up, and she snapped a picture on her phone. And she's looking, and as soon as she took the picture, the thing kind of it realized something was going on,
Right.
It made a sound when every picture she took, it did. It was like a shutter picture sound, just like it's for the effects. She had it set up, and the thing turned and looked at her. It was more watching me, I think. It was focused on me. I think because it could tell that I was a male, it could tell that she was a female. We're pretty casual. And we continued to eat our lunch. She snapped 2 pictures of it. We're eating our lunch, eating our food and all that. We're in this position for like 20 minutes watching this thing. But after about 3 or 4 minutes of watching it, before she even snatched the picture, the one behind the bush, it was cute. It just started pulling its head back. So slow. It took probably 5 minutes from the time it started till it was actually all the way behind the bush.
Right.
So it pulled its head back so slow. It got all the way back, and then it just stopped behind the bush. Once it had its head behind the bush, it seemed to relax a little more. The one out in the open, you could see its eyes. It was scared. You could tell they were juveniles. They seemed inexperienced, dealing with humans. But we finished our lunch, and I said, "Honey, I think we need to just go and leave these alone before something happens." They're scared. Animals get scared. You don't know what can happen. She goes, "Okay, I'm ready." It's like neither one of us could take our eyes off them.
Right.
Well, I stood up first, and this thing started panicking. It's like it leaned over like it was going to take off and run, and then it decided not to. It just stayed there. It's like it leaned over like it was going to run again, and it just stayed. And I'm going to talk to it. I'm just going to say, "No fear," And what I actually said was, I held my hands up and showed my hands were empty. I said, "Empty hands," and something I had seen in a video. I said, "No ill will, empty hands." And I picked up my backpack, and this thing is looking at me, and it's like, "What are you trying to tell me?" It had this puzzled look in its face, like, that's how close we were. I could see the expressions in its face. It was like, you could tell it looked puzzled. I grabbed my backpack, and I put it over my shoulder, and I raised my hand up. I said, "Bye, friend." No ill will, I said again, I think. What came out, and I waved goodbye. Diana got up, and she lifted her hand up. And when this thing's looking at me, not knowing what to make. And she got up, and it turned its head slightly. She stood up, and it looked at her, and then it looked right back at me, you know. And she raised her hand and said, "Bye." You know, it was cute. You know, she says, "Bye," and she's waving at it. And this thing was just looking at it. It's like, what the heck are you people doing? You know, it's just, you could see the expression in its face. We were that close, you know. It was just, I can't believe these humans, you know. It's just like, you know, it just looked puzzled.
Right.
But it didn't have the fear in its face anymore. Like it, you know, from the beginning, you know, when we first saw it, it was panicking. You could see it real bad. You know, it was scared.
Sure.
It just stared at us, and we turned and we walked down the creek. As we're walking down the creek, we got to the point where we could see behind the bush where the one was. As we're walking, this thing lays down, and it's laying on the slight hillside, and it laid its head down and just tilted back, put its arms out, and just laid flat. Like, I'm not here. I'm just a black spot on the ground.
Just keep doing your thing.
Yeah, you know, it just laid there and just froze solid, you know. I said, "Honey, do you see that?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "It's laying there. It's trying to blend in, I think, you know." And it's just like, "Yeah." And she's kind of chuckling and laughing. I'm laughing too. And we kept going. We're walking, you know. And the one behind the tree, it's just staring, you know. And it's just the one that was out in the open, it's turning its head and following us. It's not moving its body much, you know. It's just watching us go, you know. We got down the creek about another 30 or 40 yards. We went behind this big rock, and when we came out the other side of this rock, all three of them had disappeared. They were gone. It took us probably 7-8 seconds to get past, you know, the back of this rock and back out to where we could see again.
Right.
They had disappeared completely, all three of them. I didn't hear a thing. I didn't see nothing. We looked all over just to see which way they went. We could not make out nothing at all, and they were gone. It was that, you know, disappeared that fast. But it's like, she laughed and giggled, you know, and she leans over and gives me a kiss. She goes, "Thank you, honey, you know, for bringing it." You know, it's like, it made a lot to her, you know. It meant a lot. You know, it really did. It made me happy that she got that lucky. You know.
Sure.
You know, it was the first time out to see one, actually. See three, you know.
Right.
That was my best sighting so far. You know.
Yeah, I guess that would be. I mean, first of all, you saw three, not just one, and you got to share it with someone, which is cool.
Yeah, it's totally awesome. You know, especially at the time with my girlfriend. You know, we're
right.
You know, again type thing right now. We're off. You know.
Sure.
We both our lives are so busy. And we both have kids, and she has health issues. So like I said, we're off again, on again. We have time. We spend time together. That's about it. You know.
Sure. So you've had the 5 sightings, which is awesome. I mean, that's 5 more than I've had, so I'm a little jealous. But so you've had the 5 sightings. You set up the habituation areas. You've been out. You've been leaving gifting bowls, and you said to some success, which is great. Now, yeah. I guess all this has kind of led to some interviews, and you've had some other interviews recently. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had several now. I've done. Actually, my nephews, I think it was like 22 years ago, were up in Oil Creek. They went up to camp together, spend the night camping, and they were up there. It's where the ski trail starts. It's a real nice place in Oil Creek. But they have several, you know, hiking trails and ski trails set up for people cross-country skiing, and there's a camping area there. Well, they were in the woods, right at the farthest camping spot. Their vehicle was parked probably 30 yards away. They had a nice fire going, and it started getting late. You know, they already cooked out, and they had dinner and everything, and they started getting hungry. It was probably 10:30, and they decided to cook up a bunch of hot dogs. And right as they started getting the hot dogs all ready to cook, they heard some screams, you know, from the woods. Just, it thought it was a woman. That's what he said. It sounded like a woman screaming for her life. And it's like she was being murdered, he said. And it's like, they looked at each other, you know. It was my nephew Paul telling me about this. And it's like, what is that? It's like, what is that? And it's like, it was down in the woods in the blackness. They could not tell how close. They thought maybe 100 yards at that point, but it really sounded blood-curdling, like somebody was being murdered, and it lasted probably a few minutes, and it just stopped. And they're like, wow, I don't know what that was, it's like, I never heard anything like that, They got their hot dogs cooking finally, and they're eating, and after probably eating a couple of hot dogs each, they're cooking more, and it starts up again. This time it's like 40 to 50 yards away, and it was so intense. He said it just made his heart flutter. Every time it started screaming, it's just like he felt a vibration in his chest. It was so intense. And this lasted probably like 4 or 5 minutes, and it was getting closer, and it was getting closer. And they said, to heck with this. They were done. They grabbed their stuff that they could, left their tent. They weren't even going to bother with it. They grabbed everything they could carry, and they ran to the car, threw it in the car, left their tent. They had cooking equipment and everything was left there. And they jumped in the car, and they pulled out. They could not handle it. They could tell whatever it was coming right at them. They knew they were there. Their fire was probably 5 feet high, 3 or 4 feet around, and it was burning pretty good, and it was lit up. And they could tell whatever it was just coming into the firelight when they pulled out. They could just see a black shape, no distance, but they could not make it out any detail or anything. But the intensity of the scream, every time it would scream, I'm guessing it might have been a female, possibly. That's what he thought it was. It sounded like a woman screaming. And they packed it up and went home. By the time they hit the house, it was probably pushing midnight, and they had to beat on the door to get my brother Mike to let them in. They're like, what are you doing home? And it's like, they're camping. They told him what happened, and it's like, Mike's like, what do you think it was? And it's like, I don't know, Dad, They were both probably just about 20 years old. I'd say about 18, 19 years old at the time. Still, young kids,
Sure.
They were both petrified, scared to death.
Right.
My nephew Paul had several experiences up there, riding his bike at dusk and at night with friends. Him and another friend, Mike, his name, were up there about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and it was just starting to get real dark, and they had something coming through the woods, walking. They could hear it just crunch, 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 You could tell it was two-footed, and it was following them near the Miller Farm area. And it's a real famous spot. This whole creek is historical in value. The very first oil well ever drilled was drilled at the end of the creek, actually, at the beginning where it starts up in Titusville. And it's quite famous area. There's a lot of history in this creek. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful park now. They were stopped, got off the bikes, and they just listened. And when they stopped the bikes and got off the bikes and stared, it stopped. And they're looking into the woods. It's pretty black now. They can't see anything. And they went and they got back on the bikes again and started rides, and they could hear it walking with them again. It was walking fast and to the point where it was staying right with them. And after about probably 10 minutes of this thing, following them into the wood line, they just said, to heck with this. Let's go. Paul panicked, Mike panicked, and they started pedaling as hard as they could. They got down to where this bridge crosses the creek, went across that bridge, and as soon as they crossed the bridge, they stopped and turned back. Cause it either had to be in the water, which they could see, or it had to come up onto the trail and actually follow them. At this point, right at the edge of the wood line where it goes down into the creek, they could see a shape come up and just stop. It looked black, of course. It was night, no lights on it. But he said it was big. It was probably 7 foot tall. And it just stood right in this wood line watching them, at the end of the bridge where they were looking over. And it just stared at them and just stared at them. They had probably a mile and a half to go to their vehicles to load up their bikes to drive out of there. They were done. They jumped on the bikes and they just started pedaling.
Sure.
They didn't know what to do with it. And the thing just stared at them, the whole time. It never moved from that point when they took off. My nephew Paul, he's quite a character. He's most polite person you ever met, you know. My family goes to church and everything. My sister-in-law was a secretary at our church for 25 years, and Paul is the most likable boy in the world, you know. And my other nephew, Eric, he was training to become a pastor at the church, you know. He was getting his degree and everything through the church at one point.
So they're credible.
Very credible, yes.
Gotcha.
They could not lie. They just in them to lie. Yeah.
Well, Doug, I'll tell you what, man. You've done a great job today. You've shared some great stories. I've enjoyed listening to them. I'm a little jealous over some of the experiences you've had, but I'll get mine eventually.
No, Ed, you're welcome to come over. We'll spend a day, or if you want to stay tonight, you know, spend a couple days over here. You want? We might get lucky. You know, I've got quite a few habituation sites. At the very least, we're going to see something, structures, and
sure,
we just might get lucky.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about doing that. Hopefully, sometime in August, maybe I'll get out there and we'll do that.
I'm beginning to believe that's an important time of the year for them. Starting to lean possibly. I'm trying to figure out possibly. I haven't seen the young ones yet, but I think that might be a breeding time of the year for them possibly. It makes sense because their babies would be born if they carry like humans. It'd be probably in the warmer part of the summer. It'd give them a chance to survive better, you know.
Sure.
Before the cold weather sets in, but it seems like all the activity the big activities in the August month. A lot of the sightings, you know, and interviews I've done, and August seems really, really important. You know, for some reason, they're really active.
That's exactly why we do this, because you know I take a mental note of that. I write that down, and you know when I do my next interview, I kind of ask questions like that, like what time of the year was it, when was it, so maybe we can grasp something out of all these stories combined, and grasp a
hypothesis that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. You know, put together a hypothesis that makes sense, and I think we will. Your stories are right with everybody else's that I've talked to. Your descriptions are right in line, and I've enjoyed listening to them. I appreciate you taking your time today to join us. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with us before we go?
Well, let's see. I did one other interview. It's actually real close to one of my habituation areas, very close, actually. This was from 1989. A gentleman was taking a girl to the Gettysburg area, helping her move. And the last trip he made 2 trips that day. Started off with a load right early in the morning, and he came back. This is a good 6-hour round trip, and they loaded up another load and took it. And he was coming back. He left her there, and the first time and the second time he did a load, and he brought her back. He still had more to do, but they got back into the area about 1 o'clock off the interstate, and they were coming through the Clarion area and then into the Freiburg area, and then jumping on the Route 157 for the final trek into Oil City, which 157 runs pretty much parallel to Route 62, and one of my habituation sites is on 157. I have one on 62, and he just got out of Freiburg and was starting down the road, and it was 1 in the morning, and as soon as they hit the main road and was driving towards the Venus area to the right, they seen this thing, and it was right at this ranch house. It was probably 25 feet off the road, and it was just tearing the side of this house apart. And it was grabbing the siding, ripping it off. It was ripping into the boards, and it's throwing stuff over its shoulders as it's ripping. It's just grabbing it and tearing it, pulling it. He said this thing was huge. It was as tall as almost the spouting on the side of the house. It's grabbing wood and ripping it and throwing it, and he could not believe it. He was doing like 20 miles an hour at this point, you know, and the thing never even looked at him, never even paid attention, could care less they were there. As spot probably right across in front of the house, and they come to a stop and just looked at it for like 1 second watching this stuff fly, and he said, I'm out of here. He floored it and gunned it and took off.
Wow.
He didn't have the nerve to sit there and watch what was going to happen next.
Sure.
It appeared the house was like empty. Either nobody was living there or nobody was home at the time. And he said it was never seen anything like it in his life. I know this man probably 40 years. Yeah, close to 40 years now. He don't exaggerate much. He was actually my brother's boss for a security company at one point for several years. He was in charge of several officers. And he seems pretty reliable. The house that he's talking about, I believe I know which one he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I drove out that way. I used to do a lot of haying for a job. And during certain times of the year, it's like he wouldn't be able to make it out to feed his animals, and I'd go out and pull a couple bales out and feed his animals for him, and then, continue on into Freiburg and stop. Usually he'd give me $20 to take care of the animals for the day, and I'd make sure out there. And I'd stop out, and I went to this deli for my lunch, I put in like 10 in gas, and then as I was driving out there, I seen this house. I didn't realize, I thought a car went through the wall. There was a gaping hole in the front of the house. And it's like, I looked at it, and the bottom of the house, there was like a 2-foot section, 2 foot high. And I figured it was all intact. I said, well, this car had to have been airborne going into this house, the way it went in. But there was no car there. But it's like I had no idea what was going on with it. And then he told me this story like 20-some years later. Well, it was 89, 99, 2009, like 24, 25 years later. He tells me the story about what had happened. And about 6 months after he saw it, they tore the house down and just demolished it.
Sure.
But if I would have known at the time what had happened, I would have stopped and tried to talk to somebody, neighbors in the area, close to the house, just to see what had happened, if anybody
right.
called. But I had no idea. I thought it was a car wreck, which, it was kind of surprising. This is real close to one of my habituation sites, and where I had a Class B sighting. Well, not a sighting, actually. I had an occurrence and scared the death out of me. Yeah, it was so intense. I was fishing a native trout stream, walking in the water, and the stream where it starts out is only 2 foot wide. When you're driving down the highway, you wouldn't even know the stream was there. You got to park, and then you walk into the woods. And after like about 50 feet, all of a sudden there's a 2 foot wide creek below you, and it's coming right out of the hill. You walk a little further, it's 3 feet wide. Go a little bit further, it gets 3-4 feet. And probably after about 100 yards, it's 5 feet, 5.5 feet wide. It's just all native brook trout. And I got in there, and it's like I'm using rooster tails, catching one after another. I probably caught 50 to 60 of these brook trout. One big one probably about a 14, 15 incher, and it was like a snake. They're so skinny, they're really tiny as far as around the diameter. It got off, and I missed it, and it's like, and it's like I was kind of determined. I wanted to catch them. This area is so thick of vegetation, you actually got to walk through the water, unless you want to walk 40 or 50 yards out around to go to the next hole. And the way it's set up, it's actually the whole creek is a nice hole. You just got to be able to cast, with the growth, that brush. That's the thing that causes you any problems is you snag up if you're not careful while you're casting.
Sure.
Well, I'm walking. I'm a half mile down in the woods now, and I'm walking in the water, and all of a sudden I notice it's like I'm listening to my footsteps, kind of, just walking. And it's kind of interesting to hear your feet dragging in the water and stepping and the noise, and all of a sudden I realize that it's like I'm hearing somebody else walking in the water. I'm like, what the heck? And I'm looking up the stream, I'm looking behind me. Is this in front of me or behind me, And I come to a dead stop, and I could hear it. It was still walking. And I realized it was in front of me. Whatever was making this sound was staying out ahead of me. But it's so thick, you just cannot see anything. So I continue on, and I'm walking, and I go on, and I stop, and I listen. and I start walking again, and just to make sure, it's still walking. It's there, and I got about 100 yards downstream, and I'd stop, and I'd hear it. So I started walking again. I didn't want to scare it. I just wanted to look at it. But this thing was smart enough. It was staying ahead of me. It would not let me get a look at it.
Right.
But all of a sudden, I don't know, I just stopped, and I didn't hear nothing. It's like, I'm thinking, well, it's either stopped, and it's listening for me, or it got out of the water. And then just all of a sudden, I had this, I don't know, this feeling that something was watching me real close. I turned to my right, and there's this huge brush pile. It's probably 10, 12 feet high, and it is so thick of branches piled up. It's just in the middle of the woods here. It looked like somebody had just spent all day long, or days long, actually, piling this brush up. And
right.
It was probably 30 feet long. It looks to be 15 feet thick at least, that I could see. And it was at least, like I said, 10, 12 feet high. And I'm looking at this, and I just had this gut feeling, whatever was in the water walking, that I feel is now watching me, is right on the other side of that pile. And I knew it, And I'm just having a stare down with a brush pile, I knew where it was, I'm staring at it, and I'm just looking. And I'm like, okay, maybe if I lean over and look real intent, I'll startle it. Maybe it'll panic. It'll take off, and maybe I'll see it. I wanted to think, whatever it was that I saw. So I leaned over real fast. I looked, and I just gazed right at it real hard. And as soon as I did this, it sounded like a 1,000-pound bull took off on the other side of this brush pile and just started running into the timber. You could hear trees exploding, just shattering, and chunks flying. You could hear logs crashing. And this thing, I don't know how many trees it hit, but it mowed them all over. You
right.
could hear it. It was so intense. And this thing just kept running and mowing. And every now and then you could hear it break out of the trees, and then brush crash. You could hear the brush hitting, and crunching, and then boom, another tree would crash. It sounded like it was literally just exploding. Just be blown apart from the destruction of it. And the debris, you could hear it flying, coming off it whenever it hit. And this thing took off and kept running. I could hear it going for about 4 or 5 minutes until it just finally was out of sight. I could not hear another sign of it. Never saw anything. But listening to it walk in the water, it was absolutely two-legged in the way it was walking. It was making identical sounds as I was making. I'm kind of scared at this point. I'm nervous. It's like, well, I said, I am not going over there to look around that brush pile. No way.
Right.
I'm a half mile in the woods, and I said, I'm out of here. I turned around, and I started walking. I got probably 15, 20 steps, and the next thing I knew, I was coming out of the woods at the truck, which was over a half mile away. And it's just like I was in a stupor. I was kind of dazed. I felt like I was in a dream state. But it's like I'm staring at my truck, and it's like I knew this didn't make sense. It's like, how did I get here? It's like this just happened. It seemed like a minute ago.
Right.
It's like I was well over a half mile in the woods, and I walked over to my truck, and it was just like it was a dream. I was dreaming, and I stared at the truck, and I got in, and I sat down, and finally I lit a cigarette. I sat there and I smoked a cigarette because I wasn't comfortable to drive, at all.
Sure. Let's pick up.
And, I just sat there. Finally, I got a nerve. I started the truck, and I cleared my head. I kept trying to clear my head, I should say. And I tried to get the fog. It was out of my head. It was in my head out. And I pulled up, and it's like I stopped and looked at the roads and make sure nothing was coming. And I wasn't even sure about that. And I look again. It's like, did I check? It's like I had to double check to make sure nothing was coming. And I could not remember if I had even checked once. It was really, I don't know, whatever it was, it affected my brain so hard. I don't know what caused it, but like I said, I could not remember the whole walk out of the woods. And it was just like, it felt to me that I was transported. I wish I would have had a watch on,
Sure.
Have a preference for time to see what actually happened, but like I said, next thing I knew, I was just coming out of the woods. And I drove home. time I hit Oil City, I felt normal again. This is probably, I'd say at least 15 miles from Oil City, right around 15 miles. It's now one of my best habituation sites. It's a good one. I find stuff. Yeah, it's like, yeah. You come up, I'll definitely take you there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely visit that area too. That's an interesting story.
Yeah, I had to tell you about that because of what happened with everything.
Sure.
I could not figure it out. I still, I can't believe, how much it affected my brain, But yeah, I felt like I was in a dream world, It's just euphoric, That's the only way I could describe it is euphoric.
Right. Well, that's awesome.
Like that, or heard, other people having that experience or not. But
I mean, I've heard some, through my interviews, I've heard some things pretty similar to that. Not so much as a loss of time, basically, but I've heard people talk about the mind speak and the zapping, which would be, I would assume, would cause the same sensation. So the theory's out there, and I definitely not one to say that it's not possible.
Yeah, I've heard some things too that I never used to give much credence to, but I'm starting to take extra looks at them now.
Sure.
And maybe I'm just being naive, and maybe some of these stories are true. It's like people talk about cloaking, and it's like I never gave it much credence, but now I'm really wondering, and after some of the one that disappeared so fast and was nowhere in sight, maybe this cloaking is something to it. I've taken pictures, actually, and I know there was nothing there when I took a picture, and all of a sudden on this one hillside, there's one standing behind a bush, which I know wasn't there,
Right.
I know it wasn't there when I took the picture, It absolutely was not there. And, yeah, it's in one of my habitation pictures and on my Facebook, if you want to check it out. It's standing on the hillside there looking right behind a bush. I mean, it's only one out of all my pictures there that this had happened in, but I know it wasn't there when I took the picture, and there it is.
Right.
And after talking to one lady, very renowned, I know you know this lady quite well because you've interviewed her, but Arla, and
correct.
Yeah, and after what she said, it's like it makes a lot of sense. It really does. And how they have these capabilities, I don't know, but
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been doing some research myself, and I found out that there's a primate in Borneo that has poison, that's poisonous. And there's 3 primates in Madagascar, I believe, that hibernate. So,
wow.
So what? Anything is possible. Everything is possible. And these things are scientifically proven. That's not just me talking.
Yeah.
This is science, And
that's amazing. I never heard of that. As far as being poisonous.
Yeah, it actually it was an interesting read. I'll send that to you. But they excrete the poison under their arms, and they rub their hands under their arms, and then they put it on their mouth. So when they bite something, it's enough poison to kill a man. And they'll also put the poison on their hands, and then rub their babies down before they go hunting or go get food, so that if something attacked the babies, it would taste the poison and run away. So it's so it's pretty interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting read, that's for sure. I'll send that to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Doug. Hey, buddy. Thank you. I appreciate all the time you spent with us today, and I know I've taken up a lot of your time today, and we will. Thank you very much for taking time today.
Yeah, we'll talk again.
We will. Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot of more stories to tell, and we may end up having to cut this one in and make it a 2-parter, but we'll do what we can. But if you ever hear something new happening, or you ever get something else happening, send me a message, give me a call, something. We'll get out there.
I'll keep you informed of any good progress and anything new. I definitely will.
Good deal. thanks again, Doug. I appreciate your time today, man.
No problem, bud.
All right. You have a good one.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.